All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out to UC Riverside Palm Desert on this delightful Tuesday evening. Welcome to our Palm Desert Centre for the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences at your University of California, Riverside. My name is Peter Atkinson. I'm the Dean of the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. And an interesting fun fact of our college is that whilst we are certainly a central and beloved part of the University of California, Riverside, which was established in 1954, the institute or the experiment station from which we arose was the Citrus Experiment Station that was established in Riverside in 1907. And that's sort of relevant to tonight's subject matter because Professor Baird works on cooperative extension in turfgrass, which goes back to our original mission of aiding the entire Southern Californian community with all things agricultural and recreational. So thanks for joining us tonight. And I welcome Jim Baird who will give this talk after a brief introduction. Before we do this, I'd like to introduce a great partner we have here in the Coachella Valley, and that is Frank Figueroa. Could you please stand? So Frank is not only the Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Coachella, but I have the pleasure of working with Frank on a day-to-day basis in the Dean's office down at UC Riverside. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Pro Tem for the city of Coachella, Frank Figueroa.
Here we go. Thank you, Dean Atkinson. And, I have the pleasure of working for the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences, but I grew up in the Coachella Valley and I know what agriculture means. My family, I lived on a great farm that had a lot of different agriculture. So I grew up in agriculture, and agriculture to me is near and dear to my heart. And in the Coachella Valley, we feed the Coachella Valley, and I think it's important that we continue to have these great partnerships with the University of California, Riverside, but also bringing these lecture series to our desert area where we get informed of what that science research is doing and how it affects our day-to-day. And I'm excited to learn more about today's presentation, and thank you to the University of California again.
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you for everything you do for the Valley and for your colleagues and the students at UC Riverside. Now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Baird, who will give his talk on saving turfgrass in California and the Southwest. In a region with increasing population, temperature, and drought and consequential declining water resources, turfgrass is often the primary target for removal or even prohibition from the landscape. Dr. Baird will set the record straight about the functional, aesthetic, and environmental benefits of turfgrass, including providing tips for water conservation on lawns and landscapes. Most notably, he will highlight the UC Riverside Turfgrass Breeding and Genetics program that is making significant strides towards developing turfgrasses with improved drought resistance. Dr. Baird has been a turfgrass specialist at UCR since 2008. Indeed, in the whole University of California system, he's the only turfgrass specialist we have. He is a true gem of California. His primary responsibilities include conducting research and providing outreach for the California turfgrass industry. He received his bachelor's in science in landscape horticulture from Colorado State University at Fort Collins, and received his master's in agronomy and soils and his PhD in botany, both from Auburn University. Prior to UCR, Jim was an assistant professor of turfgrass research and teaching at Oklahoma State and Michigan State Universities, and was an agronomist in the Northeast region for the United States Golf Association Green Section. To show you how passionate Jim is, just one little anecdote. Many months ago, I think it was probably late August last year, I was talking with Jim in our office, and the next day or two I was off to Australia, which is where I'm originally from, as you can probably tell, a land of many great golf courses, lawn tennis, and cricket fields and football grounds. And I was going to see my mother, and she lives in a small town about 100 miles northeast of Melbourne. And, I have an association there that goes back almost 40 years. and I run around the football field and run along the creek trails. And Jim gave, without missing a beat, Jim gave me an assignment. And my assignment was to go to the cricket field, determine the grass, and measure the length of the grass. So once I had found a hotel and had a good night's sleep, next morning I ventured out. It was very cold and foggy and misty, and I fulfilled my mission and reported back. It was called couch grass, but that is Bermuda grass. So please welcome just an indication of how passionate he is. I was happy to be doing work for him in a distant land, and it was a pleasure. So, Jim, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Dean Atkinson. Good evening, everyone. It's it's great to see all your faces here. It's fantastic. I'm so happy to share with you my passion, as the dean mentioned. I mean, I love grass. Can you guess maybe what my favorite color is? There you go. Yeah, it is destiny. And so I'm so happy to share with you tonight a little bit about what we're doing to ensure that, you know, our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren enjoy the same plant that I am so enamored with, and I think many of you are in the room tonight. And so, without further ado, what I wanted to give you, as if we're in the classroom, right? We have to talk a little bit about what we're going to say tonight. So here's the batting order. We need to learn turf speak, right? We got to talk the talk if we're going to talk about grasses, and I'll tell you in a moment why that's important. Because oftentimes the questions I get asked about what I do has nothing to do with what I do when people ask me. And so talk about that. I don't see a lot of prospective students in the audience, but in case, and you know, we're all prospective students, right? You know, the thing I always tell folks, you know, when I was in college, I wanted to become a golf course superintendent. That was my original goal. But the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. And so here I am still in that same boat. And so I want to talk a little bit about maybe we're not, any of us are changing our careers anytime soon, but talk about maybe influencing those who are thinking about that. Want to talk about the turfgrass industry a little bit in general and specifically to California and talk about, you know, our importance in the state and internationally or nationally. We're going to talk a lot about the benefits, defending our turf, so to speak, and we'll certainly do that. And then last but not least, I want to talk about, you know, what I think, I mean, we've made a lot of contributions, but try to, in a short amount of time, tell you what I feel are the most significant contributions our turf program has made, not only in my 18 plus years tenure, but in the history of the program. And so that's the basic outline. So we'll dive in here, and obviously room for questions. I feel like I'm going to get a lot of good ones as we move along. So that's good. Okay, so let's talk the talk with turf lingo. And so I consider myself a turfgrass scientist. And oftentimes when I meet someone and I tell them I'm at UCR, and of course they say, what do you teach or what do you study? And I say turfgrass, and then they're like, oh, that's the artificial stuff, right? And so no, I have to explain. And so we define us turfies, if you will. We define turfgrass as a contiguous, that's a fancy word for connecting ground cover. That's got to be a grass, right? And but the two important things about turf grasses are they tolerate persistent low mowing and traffic. I mean, maize is a grass, right? But we can't mow it low and traffic it. So that's a turf grass. And then to get more specific, because this is what we do for a living, we refer to turf as not only the plant itself, but also the underlying soil. And so oftentimes that's kind of term is interchangeably used, turf grass being kind of the plant itself, the turf being that plant plus the soil. And then of course, when you harvest that for transplanting, that's sod. And so that makes a lot of sense. And then another thing you might hear, especially out here in the valley where we have a lot of warm season grasses that can be established by sprigs, they are pieces of stolons. Stolons are above ground horizontal shoots. And so when we chop those up into pieces, they can root at the nodes and develop another stand of turf. And so that's another way that we can harvest and then reestablish a little more cost-effective way of establishing a turf area. And then, boo, the bad stuff, synthetic, artificial, fake. There's, I will maintain, I will say one nice thing about synthetic turf tonight, and just from my experience, first of all, there's several, I'm the lone, as Dean Atkinson said, the lone turf specialist in the UC system, but a lot of my colleagues around the country, some actually are dedicated to synthetic turf. And I remember my past history, like for example, the old Giants stadium, and you have the New York Giants playing football there, the New York Jets playing football there, like 4 or 5 colleges playing sports there, not only football, but soccer. And you just, it's one of those situations, high school, where if you're getting that much play, that much wear, it's really hard to sustain, the natural stuff. And so that might be a situation, but there's so many situations I know of in the state where that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be, reverting to this when there's so many good things about that. So that's all I'll say about. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about synthetic a little bit. I feel very fortunate in that I found something at the age of 16. I found my passion, really, and I often think about, like, my son's 22 now. I'm not sure if he's found his passion yet. He'll get there. Yeah, but I'm so it's so pleasing that to me that I started out playing golf around 13 and lived right next to a municipal golf course in my hometown in Colorado, and just cut through my neighbor's yard and I could be on the golf course. And then when I turned 16, I learned that I could, I needed to get a job, and I started to work on the maintenance staff. And that is when I caught the bug. And I never looked back. I never wanted to be anything else but in this industry. And I feel very fortunate in that regard. It is truly my passion. And so there's 2 things I think that really make it for me with turf. One is I love sports. I love sport. I love golf. I love anything, played on grass, or in most other sports, you can play on a hardwood or whatever. I just love sports in general. And so the other thing is I get to spend most of my time outdoors. And I have an office and I have to do work behind the computer, just like most of the rest of us, but I get to spend most of my time outside. So I'll take you back a little bit in time. Anybody recognize that gentleman? That's Tiger Woods at the 2002 US Open at Bethpage. And anybody recognize this guy? That's me. That's back when I worked for the USGA. And interestingly, this was like kind of the height of his popularity. And so, he had this, he would always kind of just, because they would just swarm. This was during the practice rounds. And when they found out the Tiger was on the course, everybody would just go there. And so he snuck on the golf course, and we were taking ball roll measurements on the green, to try to look for what, oftentimes if you play golf, you've heard of this stim meter and the ball roll. And a lot of times golfers, the longer the ball rolls, the faster the greens are. And they're always interested. I got to have fast green, or we have to have fast greens. But the USGA standpoint was, we want 18 consistent greens more so than, well, fast, for the best players in the world, you need to have that, but more so consistency. And so when we had just finished this green, and then we saw Tiger, and he was just 1 hole away, and then so we thought, well, we need to go check this out again. I'm not sure if we got that measurement correct. And so we went there, and of course, my little joke here. I bow to Tiger Woods. The stimp meter is exactly 3 foot long. So you use that as your kind of your measurement stick for the ball roll. And you never, as a USGA employee, you're not supposed to talk to the players unless they talk to you. And he only asked us one question. He wanted to know what they were rolling uphill, what the ball was rolling uphill, which of course, if you're properly doing stimp meter, you're trying to find as level surface as possible, which is not always the easiest thing to do on a undulating putting green. But that's the only question he asked us, and so he received an answer. Okay. Yeah, he made a lot. I don't know if I don't think he won that year, but he won a lot of them. Just another thing, I probably have more Dodger fans or maybe Angels fans in the room, but I happen to be a Giants fan. And just one of the reasons is because I've been able to do a little bit of work at the field where the Giants play in San Francisco. And this is Greg Elliott. I think Greg is no longer in that position, but he was the field manager for the San Francisco Giants. And it's just, again, that outdoors, that being a part of sports. I mean, I love my job. Yeah, I can't tell you enough about that. And so interesting thing about baseball is you ask any field manager and they'll say, well, the grass, that's the easy part. What's hard is the dirt, taking care of the dirt. That's probably a field manager's nightmare, or just biggest challenge is taking care of the dirt surfaces on especially a baseball field. And then I think we're all excited about what's to come, the World Cup in North America. By the way, all matches contested on turf, the natural stuff. And that's always been the way with the FIFA, and that's fantastic. And I really haven't had a chance in my career to do much work with athletic field management, but as you can see here, I have colleagues across the country, especially at the University of Tennessee and Michigan State University, that's their deal. That's their deal. They've been doing a lot of work in preparation for the World Cup matches, and so it's just, again, a great, if you like sports, you like working outdoors, I can't think of a better a better profession to be in, really. And just the things that we deal with, some of them are good, some of those are not so good. We're dealing with Mother Nature, and you never know what's going to happen. It could be too warm, too wet, too dry. And so these are just some of the things that we deal with in managing turf, especially on a high level. This is, you probably recognize most of these things. This is some irrigation challenges due to spacing. You get these donuts. That's something that, could be taken care of with maybe some better sprinklers and maybe spacing and whatnot. And then here's an older putting green where they're actually installing drainage kind of after the fact. And interestingly, I spent time in the Northeast, and most of the golf courses were built in what are called like push-up greens. They were just kind of built from Mother Nature, and then over time sand applied and whatnot. And so they don't drain as well. And so there's this company that can come in, and you close this putting green down in one day, and they put in this drainage, and the green is open the next day and playable. And so that's quite remarkable. So just some of the things that we deal with, managing organic matter. How many golfers in the room? There's a few of you, I think. So these are things you don't like to see as golfers, but are agronomically important because, we manage organic matter we tend to think like turf is like our carpet, where, that it's the plants themselves. But what's happening is plants are dying as new ones are being formed, and everything just looks living and all good to us all the time. But those decaying, dying shoots and whatnot, roots, rhizomes, are lending themselves to what we call organic matter or thatch, and then that becomes an issue with creating a soft surface, and then water doesn't penetrate as well. So these are the reasons why we need to do things like aeration. And you can see what that does to a profile and how it lets in air and allows deeper rooting. And so that's important for the overall health of the turf stand. We deal with a lot of pests, and this is just a little sampling of what we deal with. Insects, obviously weeds. I'm not a pathologist. I just play one at UCR in terms of turf pathology, but I always like how turf pathologists name diseases very apt. This is large patch, and this is caused by a fungus, and it's large and it's a patch. And so this is Rhizoctonia for those who probably know a little bit about pathology, and one of the most common fungi that affects a lot of different plants. And then nematodes. Here's a little fun fact about nematodes, because I have my colleague, and I'll talk a little bit about our work, but Dr. Ola Becker does what I do in nematology, and he always wants to remind me that there are more nematodes on this earth than any other animal, including us, right? And so do you know how many those are? Estimated at, I didn't even know this one today, but I had to look it up. 5 quintillion nematodes estimated on there. That's 5 times 10 to the 20th. That's a lot of zeros. So that's a lot of nematodes that are out there. Thankfully, there's not that many. We certainly have some that are pathogenic to turf, and so this is one of them I'll tell you a little bit about later. Again, this was kind of put in just because we're excited at UCR about a new Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Sciences major starting in the fall of 2027. And I'm really hopeful that this will evolve, not currently so, but it will someday evolve into a concentration in turf, because, I want more people sharing. I think we all want, I do at least want more people sharing my passion. And so this is just a little bit about that. So we're very excited about that coming. Talk a little bit about the industry real quick. This is a little bit dated, but excuse it. We don't always get these kinds of surveys happening on as frequent as possible. But a 2017 estimate of the acreage in the U.S. Puts us at about 60 million acres, and this is in 2017. And so it's probably, there's places where we may have seen a decline, but we probably more seen an increase of that. And so if you look at 60 million acres, that puts us as the 3rd largest crop, which is something you probably haven't considered. And I happen to be, very proud of that fact. On the other side, before I get to the other side, I just wanted to mention about the industry, and there's a lot of different segments to it. I would say in general, as a turfgrass scientist, especially, golf drives our industry. And so, a lot of what we do, what I do, what's funded in terms of research is funded by the golf industry. And of course that spills over to everyone else and has direct applicability to all aspects of our industry, but it's really driven by golf. The other thing I was going to point out after, as proud of I am, is we're the third largest crop. We also, this is again a little bit dated in terms of a NASA image of the US, and where you see green is kind of depicted by the amount of turfgrass. And so that makes us also the largest irrigated crop, which to many, you can boast about that, but also we know that where we live with declining resources, that puts a target on us in terms of we're the ones who waste all the water. And so that's part of my message today, to try to dispel those rumors. And but at the same time, we realize the challenge. We're not growing crop for food. We're not feeding the world with grass. We're just making it more enjoyable and more functional. And so, but we deal with things all the time. This reporter who wrote this article in the Times, I've given several or been interviewed by this person several times, and they were largely positive, what are the good things that they're doing in turf. And then the next thing, I'm interviewed, and then I see the title of this is like turf is out. We're done. And here's the options. And meanwhile, I read through these options, and I would say we have a lot, we have a lot better grasses, and here's another one I love, the term native. I mean, how long do you have to live in California to be considered native? Some of the more recent genetic testing has shown that our turf grasses, some of the ones I'm going to talk about tonight, have been around quite a long time. I think a lot longer than, at least as long as a lot of the other plants. So again, that's a native plants or California friendly plants. I'm not quite sure what those mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that you're going to use less water. And when you think about it with turf grasses, we developed turf grasses. We developed them at UCR to withstand what? Low mowing and traffic. And you think about some of the native grasses you might see while you're driving across the state, across the rolling hills, are not meant for that kind of situation. They do well, but you put them in an environment where you're going to all of a sudden mow them low and traffic them. They're not going to do so well under those circumstances. So anyway, that's here to defend turf as I know it. And I tell you, at least I got an audience today that recognizes who this guy was. And so this is kind of how I feel like we get no respect. That we're the ones who are the ones wasting water and whatnot. And so we've got a mantra in our program: turfgrass does not waste water. People and faulty irrigation systems waste water. And so this is something that we continually try to educate, and it's going to continue, obviously, but I'm glad you're here to help me spread the word. So let's talk about, why it's worth having the natural stuff. And again, I go back before my days starting on the golf course, working at 16. I mean, I spent most of my every day in my backyard playing some type of sport on grass. And I know that's something that my kids didn't do. They were probably more inside and working on their device of some sort, computer device. But that doesn't mean that their kids or my grandkids, can't someday, revert back to that. There's one thing that I've learned, I've always been kind of the science guy, right? Always more interested in science aspect, and was never really like, why do I have to learn history? Well, because history repeats itself. But I could tell you one thing is, if we don't have grass around at all, how are our grandchildren or great-grandchildren going to experience that if it's extinct? And so there's a lot of recreational benefits in terms of health, mental, physical, entertainment. Don't have a lot to go into here, but there's been a lot of studies published. Doesn't mean you're playing on natural turf, you're not going to get injured, but the chances, the likelihood are much less than if you're playing on synthetic turf. I think everybody would be in agreement there. And in general, the thing about cost, there's an exorbitant cost to synthetic turf, and then the general thinking is like, well, you could just we could pay all this money, put it in, and then we don't have to do anything about it. Well, I'm going to tell you in a moment, you've got to do quite a few things to keep that synthetic turf functional, and it's not just the initial investment. Aesthetic, there's no doubt about it. I mean, what we do is part of, it's to look good, and it isn't to feed the world, like I said, but looking good and having something, having good mental, physical health is worth a lot. And I just think about, as time has gone on, and especially as we've been through some serious droughts, that property value in my neighborhood, I've seen that definitely diminish when people just stop taking care of their lawn and landscape. And so I think that's one of the important things to think about here. And then last but not least, too many to talk about in general, but I'll let you kind of just absorb these, if you will. I think about the wildfires that we've had, and I've been to some of these areas as you have as well. And sometimes the only thing that saved particular structures and whatnot have been like golf courses, and there being a fire break to wildfires. Just a lot of important benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit about one that I think is very important, especially in the Coachella Valley, and that's just, what happens when we start removing a plant material, a ground cover, a turf cover that has a definite cooling effect on the environment, which turf grasses do. Well, we start warming the environment as a result. And last time I checked, all the energy production in this state requires water. So if we remove all the plant material that's helping to cool our environment and going to xeriscaping or to synthetic or whatever, and we're going to warm the environment and we've got to cool it. Well, that requires more water. And then one other feature that, and this kind of goes back to our campus, but I have a colleague, Dr. Scudiero, who is a professor in the environmental sciences department, and he and one of my former postdocs, we were able to get a grant where we just commissioned a plane with some very fancy sensing equipment that could fly over Southern California. And specifically, we wanted them to also cover the UCR campus. And so this is our soccer field, which is synthetic turf. And here's our women's softball field, which is natural turf. So in this picture, what we're getting the imagery from, the darker the surface, the cooler the surface. And so the lighter, the higher temperature. And so we were recording temperatures on this field, fields like this, or in xeriscapes, upwards of 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're going to send your kids out, or your grandkids, or whomever, even your men's or women's soccer team on that field in the summertime, do you think they're going to like that or going to be able to withstand that? No. And so what do we have to do to mitigate that? Irrigate. We actually irrigate. Synthetic fields need to be irrigated to cool the surface. And so that's just one of the things that's not often addressed in terms of the thinking about, like, should we be synthetic or should we have natural turf? And so you can see that, relatively speaking, the natural turf surfaces are much cooler. They're losing water, much like the perspiration on our skin. When that evaporates, how does your skin feel? Cooler, right? And so it's that same kind of aspect. And so obviously one of the benefits is just the cooling effect, not only from turf, but other green photosynthesizing plants. Okay, let's talk about the major turf species in the US. There's a lot of them. Most of these we can grow in California. There's a few like centipede grass or bahia or more kind of southeastern. But the reason I show you this is on this side are all what we call the cool season grasses, all the grasses that still pretty much prevail in most of the state. Prevailing right now, you probably recognize this. You have a lot of ryegrass right now in the valley, which looks fantastic. It's a cool season grass. And tall fescue kind of being still lawn grass, king of lawn grasses in the state. So these look fantastic at this time of year, right? The challenge is that we don't have enough water, or we're running out of water to keep these grasses green in the summertime. And so that's where the warm season grasses come in. They're much better adapted to higher heat, less water. But the challenge is they tend to, even in our somewhat mild Mediterranean climate, it still gets cold enough to where they will go off color in the wintertime. And so people don't like brown grass in general. And so that's one of the challenges with these. But on the other side, because of their inherent physiology and anatomy, they are much more water use efficient. They use less water, and that's at least 20%. I'm going to talk to you today about the advancements that we've made and found in terms of our breeding programs. And we could increase that to 30 to 40% less water that these grasses require, or at least some of these grasses require on the right-hand side versus the left-hand side. Okay, want to finish doing all right, Joanne? Okay, all right, good. My last segment of the program is going to talk about some of the advancements that our program has done, kind of what have we done lately. I'd say first and foremost is that we are concerned about water. We've always been, and it's not just myself in the time I've been here, but just, my predecessors as well. We live in a climate that we don't get a lot of rainfall. We have increasing population, so we need to be able to deal with that. And so as a breeding program, we obviously, this is kind of my pyramid, so to speak, but the choosing the right grass and developing the right cultivars that use less water, that's obviously the foundation. You've got to know whatever you have to know how to best irrigate it. And of course, we provide that education as well. The technology, irrigation system technology is very important, and that's continuing to advance. And then last but not least, product testing. And I'll talk a little bit about at least three of the four this evening. Want to talk about our breeding program, past and present. It all started back in the middle of last century with Dr. Youngner. I never had a chance to meet Dr. Youngner. I wish I did. I certainly learned a lot about him when I was an undergraduate student. He developed some grasses that are still in use today, primarily Santa Ana Bermudagrass. And one of the interesting things, I was talking to a couple of folks earlier on today, and I just remembered one of the attributes of Santa Ana, and that was increased smog resistance back in the middle of last century. So it was kind of interesting. I've never seen smog effects on turfgrass. It had to have been pretty bad, but Santa Ana, among other attributes, had some better tolerance, at least to smog. And so, unfortunately, Dr. Youngner passed away at a relatively young age in 1984, and so went the breeding program at UCR. And it wasn't until 2012 when my colleague, Professor Luke Kachevsky, who's a professor of genetics at UCR, he and I resurrected the program, and we've had several breeders over time that's helped us out in terms of the program. Our focus has become Bermudagrass, which I really feel, I've told you several times tonight that it seems like right now, still, like tall fescue seems to be the go-to grass for lawns in general in the state. But I really feel in terms of warm season grasses, Bermudagrass or couch grass, that is the go-to grass for us. There's other ones that could be used, but I think for a lot of attributes, that's the one we're most interested in. And then you may or may not have heard about kikuyu grass, not so much a desert grass, but a grass that was introduced for soil stabilization into California in the 1920s, and it's taken off. And anything about kikuyu, it is very invasive. And in fact, it's on the federal noxious weed list, but in our perspective is like, it ain't going away. And so we might as well make it better. And I will help you get rid of it. It's not easy, but I'll help you do that too. But we see the glass half full with kikuyu grass. Why? Because of all the warm season grasses that I showed you, it probably keeps its color in California better than any of the warm season grasses. So it has that going for it. What we need to try to do is make it kinder and gentler, and because it's very invasive. And so those are the two that we're working on. Oh, my baby. So proud. of the first grass that we've been able to release in our program. Started back, Adam made the cross back in around 2012, and we've been taking it along ever since. And we're so happy that it's finally released. There's a lot for me to talk about that I don't have time today, but I do want to mention that several representatives here from West Coast Turf, who are the sole licensee of Coachella, and were with us every step of the way. Not only every step of the way with Coachella, but with us every step of the way in my time, which I can't thank you enough, West Coast Turf, for everything you've done for us. And so want to talk about, it's a hybrid Bermuda grass. I think this is an often asked question. Where can I get seed? It's a hybrid, is a cross between two species of Bermuda grasses. And even though the resultant progeny, if you will, form seed heads, the seed are not viable. And so it's a vegetative, propagated only hybrid Bermuda grass, as most of the nicer Bermudas we have in our industry are. Darker blue-green genetic color, hence our colors here. That was something that, it's always just came along in the selection process. But I just want to point out two things really importantly that we strive for. You don't make it in our program like Coachella has made it unless you can keep better color in at least Riverside winter. And sometimes that's cold, sometimes it's not so cold, not so cold this winter, but definitely improve color retention. And then what we stumbled along and just are very fortunate about is that the drought resistance aspect of Coachella and some of the other grasses we've developed. I would say it's 20 to 30% better than the older Bermuda grasses in terms of 20 to 30% less water required. And so we're extremely excited about that. And we've got even better ones to come in the future. And this just gives you a little bit. This is a picture taken up at Napa when we were evaluating these. This is Coachella. Its experimental name was 6-3. Here's another one we have from our program as well. And you can see it, Napa is colder than we are. This is going into winter. And you can see some of the Bermudas are starting to go dormant, whereas ours and even oldie but goodie, Santa Ana, keeping its color. I'm Dr. Youngner, was thinking about the same things that we're thinking about back, a long time ago. And so we're making progress. And don't judge me, it's my lawn here. And it's a hodgepodge. It just gets scraps, but these scraps, and then there's also the yellow spots are my Labradoodle Lucy. And so, but just look at that. Where you see green, a little Poe in there too, but where you see that dark green, that's Coachella. That's where we've come, and we'll get better, and that's what we're supposed to do. The next ones will be even better than what's come before us, but we're making progress, and I hope you can see that it's been kind of a mild winter. It certainly could be worse, but you could hopefully see that, what the advancements we made in terms of color retention. And then, wow, I tell you, how low can we go? These are some new Bermuda grass genotypes that we're currently kind of sending down the pipeline. I'm not kidding you, 77 days without any water. No rain, no irrigation, and that looks like it looks if it was getting water every single day. And so we're currently expanding these, putting them in test and seeing, what we can, will these become like the next releases in our program? So we're really super excited about that. And by the way, just look at like a common grass, nothing against it. I mean, it's been a long-standing cultivar, for turf across, not only in California, but across the country and even the world. And you look at Tifway, this is not dead. It just went dormant because it didn't have enough water. And the UCR accessions, including like the Coachella and others, doing quite well. I want to talk a little bit about Kikuyu, because we can't forget about it, not necessarily a Coachella Valley grass, but we are trying to take it and make it kinder and gentler. And we're trying to do that by a process called androgenesis, which is just, it has multiple sets of chromosomes. And this is very common in agriculture with agricultural crops. If you can reduce the ploidy level, you can reduce the vigor of a plant. And that's exactly what we need to do. Here is a haploid embryoid, if you will, of Kikuyu, and we just can't quite get it to differentiate into a plant yet. But when we do, I think we'll have the holy grail of Kikuyu. And then meanwhile, we're going for lower hanging fruit. And you see these two plots here. This is male, what we call male sterile Kikuyu grass. The white snow you see there is the male flower that typically peaks in the springtime, and it looks like it snowed on your Kikuyu grass. And so this is not what turf managers want to see. They'd rather see this. And so we're getting ready to release that to California, because really Kikuyu is pretty much a California specific grass, maybe some in a little bit in Hawaii, but mostly California. Okay, let's talk about some other things about our pyramid here real quick. Subsurface drip irrigation, when we talk about technology. We're probably, most of us are familiar with, overhead sprinklers, and we know that even though that's the common way that turf is irrigated, it's also somewhat wasteful in terms of like the water's not going where you want to, or we're getting evaporation of that. So if we're irrigating from below, then we're saving a lot more water. And talking to my colleagues who are experts in subsurface drip, they say you could save 50 to 80% water compared to overhead sprinklers. Now, this is great on small areas that are relatively flat, like teeing grounds. It's more of a challenge on sloped areas, larger areas. And so this is the golf course in Arizona, and they tried to install subsurface drip fairway. It didn't work out too well, but the USGA has just given us a grant to try to figure out how we can make subsurface drip work on a sloped area. So we're looking at emitter spacing. We're looking at running emitters perpendicular or in the same slope. And so we're going to try a lot of different things, and hopefully we can figure it out, because obviously you talk about grasses that use much less water, and then you're using irrigation systems or technology that use a lot less water, and we practically don't have to irrigate. We're using no water, right? And then last but not least, something we spent a lot of time on is asking the question, can you use products, commercial products help you use less water on your grass? And the answer is yes. And so this is from a study that we completed a couple of years ago in Las Vegas, very hot, 110, 120 degrees during the summertime. The water was cut back over time by 40%, 40% of what normally would have been used. This is what Bermuda grass looks like when you cut the water by 40%. It's not dead, it's dormant, but this is not what is acceptable. Here's a plot, same conditions. It has what we call a pigment, and you're probably thinking, oh, well, yeah, just put a pigment on there, you're just covering things up. But it's not like we're covering up dead turf. We're actually creating very good turf. So a pigment with a plant health promoter, in this case, it's mineral oil as part of this product. We're looking at fertilizer. It's important to feed the plant. I think nitrogen is the most important component of this. A plant growth regulator, which is helping the plant conserve its energy, and a soil surfactant or wetting agent. Those four things involved, and that's some pretty darn good looking turf with a 40% reduction in irrigation. So there's a lot of different ways that we're attacking the challenge of that we're running out of water, but yet we value the importance and what turfgrass can bring to our society. So last but not least, at least the products, we think it's at least a 20 to 25% water savings. And if you have these special kind of pigmented products, that helps stretch it to maybe 30 to 40%. And so we're in the process now of like, how low can we go if we put these kinds of products on Coachella? And our Coachella Bermudagrass. So we're excited to embark upon that. And then last but not least, what I want to talk about is what have we done in the Valley? Since, we're in the Valley and you're probably wondering like, well, what has the UCR Turf program done for us? And interestingly, I should say in my 19 years of working in the state, the golf course superintendents have only asked me to do one thing: more research on overseeding. Not once have they ever asked to do water research or anything like that. It's about overseeding. It's about looking good in the wintertime. And there's a lot of issues with that. And so let's go over what we did. There wasn't a time that long ago when this was the good old, I wouldn't want to say it was the good old days, but this is what transpired out here. You beat up the Bermuda grass before overseeding it and creating all this dust, air quality issues, green waste issues. And so, that obviously could not continue. We worked with the golf courses out here. One in particular is Toscana Country Club in Indian Wells. This is Rick Saul, the former superintendent there. Rick, let us use one of his fairways as kind of our research farm in the Valley. And we did work with what we refer to as kind of burn down products, herbicides that can burn the grass. And here's a control plot where we did nothing, and you can see all the green waste in just a fairly small strip of a plot. And then you can see the green waste reduction if you employ some products that will burn the turf and are still safe for the environment. And so we looked at those. Then when it comes to overseeding, superintendents wanted to know what are the best ryegrasses that we could use. And so we did multiple studies. This is one. Here's Sandra, who's with me today. Sandra was putting out this study at Mountain Vista, different ryegrass cultivars for a test to look at what's the best to use. This is a desert willow, a test that was already in. You can see the different hues of ryegrass color that we're evaluating largely and the density and whatnot. So we did a lot of work there. Then we talk about you get ryegrass up, but then you get this weed that we don't want called Poa annua or annual bluegrass. And then what do you do? And so we've looked at herbicides for controlling Poa annua, and this is just a shot of some of the newer chemistries that we're evaluating in an overseeding situation. And what you can see from here is that there's some that are just too injurious to the ryegrass, or maybe even the Bermuda grass below. But we're trying to come up with the best herbicide so you don't see this flowering on your nice emerald green ryegrass, okay? And then, of course, we get to a point where if we don't transition properly, we're not going to have very much Bermuda grass when the ryegrass goes away. So we've done a lot of work with transitioning and looking at different products to try to transition from ryegrass back to Bermuda grass. And then, of course, dare I say it, someday, I hope it's while I'm still alive, someday I'd like to see that we have a Bermuda grass that could stay green in the Valley and it doesn't need to be overseeded. That's my dream. That's my goal. Meanwhile, if you didn't want to overseed, there's a lot more options to control POA. If you didn't overseed, here's one particular herbicide that does very well there. And then what about painting? There's been a lot of advancements in terms of paints or pigments. We did work out here in the Valley with that. You could see what's your color, what's your favorite color? Blue, green? Is it, is it yellow, green? What hue do you like? And so we did studies here. We did studies across the state. I didn't tell my wife about this study. And that is, what are they going to do to the sidewalk? And so 2 years later, they went away. The colors went away. So that did not make me a big hit at home there. So just to show you, we go we go to all measures here to try to help you out. And then last but not least, when we go north, especially this last set of slides with POA, those of you who play golf in Northern California, especially along the coast, this is where our friend, the nematode, comes back into play. And I tell you, this thing was wreaking havoc on the likes of Pebble Beach, Cypress Point, and there was really no cures. And we didn't develop these products, but we helped develop the use and the proper use of them. And you can see how well they work against the nematode pest and how they really help save golf in those neck of the woods. Because this nematode is very specific, needs moisture. And so you only really find it like northern coastal California. And so there's just one example there. And then last but not least, it's this POA battle, especially on cool season greens. Do we want POA greens or not? We have some new herbicides that can selectively remove POA. Here's POA in lighter green. Here's POA cure herbicide used. There's no POA. It was all taken out and it's back to the bentgrass. And here's another new herbicide. We have done more work on these two new herbicides than any other university in terms of the development of those. And this is something that our industry, this is a big deal among golf courses in terms of trying to keep POA out. Because when you have POA is always susceptible. There's some great POA greens in this state and throughout this world, but it's the most susceptible to pests in general. And so when things go bad, you need to, you're better off a lot of times having something else than trying to deal with these pests that affect POA. So these herbicides are going to go a long way, and I feel like we were at the forefront in terms of their development. Whew. I didn't get this from Joanne. I only got this, so I feel pretty good about that. So with that, I think I have time for some questions, and Dean Atkinson has the mic if you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Round of applause for Jim before the questions.
My only question is, has Coachella been tested on a sports field anywhere in the country?
Good question. As our new Bermudagrass Coachella been tested on sports fields. I'll confirm this with our folks at West Coast. I don't believe on an athletic field so much. Is that right, Mr. Foster? Okay. Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and I also just trying to, for the sake of time, trying to stay on time. I neglected to state earlier that the first golf course to have Coachella is the Farms Golf Club in Rancho Santa Fe. So they have Coachella on fairways, tees, rough, and the next project, which is ongoing right now, is Big Canyon in help me. Newport Beach, thank you. And so, yeah, I mean, we're interested, obviously, in all the different aspects. We realize that athletic field management is a little bit different animal, depending upon what type of sport we're talking about. But we're anxious to work with UCR and try to look at how that can help and get natural grass back on the soccer field. That'd be awesome. Yes.
Can you talk about collaboration with researchers in your field in other countries, for instance, where golf is played? We heard about Australia, St. Andrews in Scotland, different climate, different kinds of grasses, South Africa, Spain, other areas in the US, research applications, types of grasses, and generally scientific strategies.
That's a good question. A lot there. I mean, in terms of like our collaboration, maybe with other programs internationally, there's a, our our field is quite small relative to other agricultural fields, but I think we're small but very well connected, and there are programs in the UK. There are programs certainly across the world, and we just finished we have an international turf conference that's held every 5 years, and it was hosted by Japan this past summer. So there's a lot of collaboration among scientists from around the world. In particular, at UCR, especially with our breeding program, we're most interested in down under, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Kenya, where kikuyu grass evolved from Kenya, and so in particular in our breeding program, we're interested in going to the source of the grasses. That's typically where you find the most diversity, which is critical to a breeding program. But yeah, I think in general, don't have the time to really give a lot more examples, but there is, I think our industry is, another thing I like about it is it's well connected, and by and large, we're very sharing of information that we're finding here, whereas, in comparing that with others across the world. Yes, any more? Yeah.
Can you generalize about a residential lawn irrigation, whether it's better to water frequently, less time, or infrequently with more time?
Ooh, that's a good question. So do we want to go light and frequent irrigation versus deep and infrequent? I mean, in general, I think in general, the rule of thumb that's probably most accepted without knowing a lot of the specifics would be attempting to do deeper and infrequent irrigation. But a lot of that depends on your root system. If your root system is very shallow, that concept of deeper and infrequent probably isn't gonna end well in terms of the plant. And so I think we need to know about the root system. But a lot of the studies have shown that deeper and infrequent tends to lend itself more to encouraging a deeper root system. I know that there's always exceptions to the rule. I've talked to a lot of pathologists, and there's apparently some, especially turf pathogens, that where management of those would probably be better, lighter and frequent than deeper and infrequent. But I think in general, the deeper and frequent, it would be my vote. It's a good question. Very good question.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jim, for a masterclass in turfgrass. One thing I have to point out is that the University of California is called a Research One university, which means that it has an intensive research program. It separates the Research One universities, for example, from Cal State's, where we confer PhDs and we train undergraduates, we teach undergraduates, but we do a lot of research. And one thing that we are held to task by, quite rightfully, by citizens, by politicians, and as recently as last week when Dean Springer and I went to Washington, D.C. for congressional visits, what do they want to know? And quite rightfully, what politicians, their staff as representing the citizens, they want to know what we're delivering. How are we, as professors and scientists, making life better for the citizens and for the citizens who come after us? And I think you've just seen a brilliant, unequivocal example of the power of research universities through their stellar professors and researchers. Jim talked about his predecessor at Riverside. There'll be others following Jim. And the quality of life, the resilience of life is guaranteed through efforts like Professor Baird. So thank you so much for everything you've done for UC Riverside. And thank you so much for coming out this evening to hear his presentation. And have a good evening.